Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Niall McAvoy. I work in the individual-led research team in SFI. In this presentation, we will provide an overview of the recently launched Sustainable Laboratory Certification Pilot Program. This will include some background and context for the program, some details on the dates and timelines involved, and some information from our partner in this program, My Green Lab, on what is involved in the certification process. Before we get started, just a quick slide on housekeeping. The format of this presentation will be a one-way PowerPoint with voiceover. The recording will be made available afterwards on SFI's website, and closed captioning will be available. I will present the introduction, and then Scott and Dulan from My Green Lab will provide some further details. Questions can be submitted at any time by typing them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and we intend to cover as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. So I'll start by providing some background and context. This pilot program is just a small piece of the SFI climate action strategy that launched last week. And the vision of this strategy is that Ireland becomes a world leader in sustainable and environmentally sound practices through research-enabled decision-making. Our mission is to innovate, partner, collaborate, and lead on funding excellent research and developing engaged and mobile talent that shapes a sustainable future. So looking into a bit more detail at the strategy, we'll see that it consists of three different strategic pillars. The first of these pillars is about the research that SFI funds in areas that are related to sustainability, for example, through our SFI research centres and individual PI awards. The second pillar is about cohesion in the research system, the transfer of knowledge to and from the research system, and the employment of highly skilled personnel with research experience in public and private sectors. And the third pillar then is the one of most relevance today. We know that research has a crucial role to play in addressing climate change and other societal challenges, but at the same time, we're aware that laboratories are resource-intensive spaces with high levels of energy use, as well as chemicals, plastics, and other consumables. So within this pillar, we focus on conducting research in as sustainable a manner as possible. So drilling down a bit more into the third pillar of our strategy, we can see the objectives and measures of success for the third pillar. And really what we want to do is to empower and support researchers across our funded projects to make well-informed choices and to take actions to reduce the environmental impact of their work. And the Sustainable Laboratory Certification Pilot Program is just the first step on this journey. Our ultimate aim is to build a culture of sustainability in SFI-funded research labs and beyond, and to develop evidence-based policies to support this. So for this pilot program being run with My Green Lab, we will support 100 SFI-funded labs on their journey to My Green Lab certification. This will be split into two tranches, with the first tranche starting this year and the second tranche starting early next year. The timeline at the bottom of the slide here gives an idea as to how we expect the first tranche to progress along their journey to certification. And we will hear more details on the certification process later in the presentation. This program is open to any principal investigator or funded investigator who currently holds funding from SFI and maintains a research laboratory. The application process is very simple. It just involves filling out a short expression of interest form online, and this will close for tranche 1 on the 7th of November. We will then be reviewing and selecting participants for the first tranche in mid-November. So we are well aware that lab sustainability already has several champions across Ireland, and we wish to complement this ongoing activity. One example of this is the Irish Green Labs Network that has been led by Una Fitzgerald from the University of Galway, among others. And we are encouraging participants in this program to join this network so that they can share knowledge and best practice. For my last slide, I will briefly introduce the program team. On the SFI side, we have Anne-Louise Holloway, Rebecca Wilson, Katrina Sheridan, and me. And between us, we're drawn from different teams across SFI, and we've quite a diverse range of experience of different research disciplines, awards, and types of labs. On the My Green Lab side, the main points of contact are Scott Grant, Jack O'Grady, and Dulan Lianage. One point worth noting is that while My Green Lab is a global company, Jack and Dulan are both based in Ireland. So I'll pass over to Scott and Dulan now, who will provide some more details on My Green Lab and the certification process.
Great, thank you so much, Niall. Appreciate it. We're going to go ahead and give a quick presentation, give you some more details about the program itself, introduce My Green Lab as well. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Dulan to go ahead and give the quick intro through the presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Scott. My Green Lab is thrilled to be partnering with Science Foundation Ireland to be certifying labs all over Ireland. My name is Dulan Lianage. I'm the market development representative here at My Green Lab. I'm based in County Mayo, and I'm joined by my colleague Scott, who's the leader of the programs team. So in this presentation, we will go over our mission statement and our program ecosystem before I hand off to Scott, who will take you through an overview of My Green Lab, the My Green Lab certification that you are all here to discover. I'll then talk a bit more about our ambassador program before I wrap up. So our company was founded by a neuroscientist and researcher 10 years ago, and she really felt the impact that scientific research was having, especially in comparison to the average office worker. And so in order to reduce that, as a company, we really focus on reducing impact through culture. Lab sustainability isn't something that can just be achieved by one individual, and it needs to be driven by best practices, by the researchers and lab members on the ground who can make the most difference. So to do that, we do that by building a culture of sustainability in science. That is our mission statement. We achieve this with education, community engagement, and market-leading certification tools. That, for me, really summarizes the My Green Lab certification really well. We tell you how you can be more sustainable in your lab and drive you to engage with your community to implement those changes, resulting in a market-leading certification with global reach and global impact. With that, we will achieve a world where science is conducted in a way that benefits both people and the planet. So next up is our program ecosystem. I won't spend a lot of time here because I know your focus is the My Green Lab certification. So in the center is the My Green Lab Ambassador Program, which I will also talk through in more detail. And Scott will go over the UN Race to Zero as well. So the My Green Lab Ambassador Program, just a quick overview of that is it's a free learning course that you can take part in and gives you a great introduction to lab sustainability. But if you want to take a deeper dive into that, our My Green Lab Accredited Professionals Program gives a modular look at lab sustainability. The Freezer Challenge is a competition that we run from January to July, and we run it to challenge members of the community to implement best practices in cold storage methods. The Million Advocates for Sustainable Science is a global advocacy campaign requesting for sustainability to be prioritized when funding research. Our ACT Eco label in the top right there is a great way for you to engage with lab sustainability. It allows us to measure how sustainable the products going into your labs are so that you can make the best decisions when purchasing new products for your labs. And finally, we have in the top left, the My Green Lab certification, which is why you're all here. So without further ado, I'll pass over to our programs team leader, Scott Grant, who is going to tell you a bit more.
Thank you, Dulan. I really appreciate it. So I know we've kind of discussed, Dulan touched base on a higher level, some of the programs, what the mission statement of My Green Lab is. And I think everyone on the call works in a lab. If you don't specifically work in the lab day to day, you're familiar with labs. And I think one of the things that we all realize is that labs are certainly resource intensive spaces. But as we go through day to day, we're doing our research, doing our experiments. It might be, maybe not in your face every day exactly how resource intensive these spaces are. So from a study from the University of Exeter, some of the rough numbers were that we're seeing about 10 times as much energy use as compared to office spaces, about 4 times more water than office spaces. And laboratories themselves globally contribute about 5.4 billion kilos of plastic waste each year. So I know when I worked in labs for a number of years, and probably many people on this call as well, you'll see the bin starts to pile up with those single-use plastics. So as you're going through these, as you kind of realize, hey, we are having quite an impact. We're doing important work we're doing important research, but this impact, what can we do and how can we contribute to this? We know, hey, we're using more energy, we're using more water, but I'm in the lab day to day. What can I really do to impact this? And I think one of the things to take a look at is, as we talk about energy, obviously some of it is the building itself. That's more difficult to impact as you're in the laboratory, as you're doing your research. But up to 57% of the energy consumption is directly impacted by the lab user themselves. So we can look at fans, we can look at plug load, we can look at lights. All of these, we can have a direct impact in our day-to-day work in the labs themselves. So certainly that's some energy. Okay, energy, great. Okay, what can I do as far as water goes? So I think as you look, about 37% of the water usage in a specific building, again, is directly related to the lab processes. You can look at single pass cooling, depending on the type of research you're doing. And then we also have autoclaves, and if you're doing a reverse osmosis for some of your experiments and some water, and things of this nature, in the lab processes, even something as simple as a leak that you've got, whether it's a faucet leak, whether it's a leak in a system somewhere, if you've got a drip, once per second, you can basically see going down the drain, wasting about 11,000 liters a year of water. That's just one source, one drip per second. So certainly a huge impact that we can take a look at as well on the water usage. Then we talk about single-use plastic. As we talk about the average person, some studies have shown that basically the average person is discarding about 150 kilograms of plastic per year. So then we think, yep, that is a huge number already. But as we do research and as scientists, this is typically about 7 times the amount. So the average scientist is typically throwing out about 1,000 kilograms of plastic per year. So even if we reduce this 10%, we would offset emissions of about 250,000 cars. So certainly huge impact. So as we're looking at energy, as we're looking at water, as we're looking at plastic waste, what can we do to address those impacts? And that's really why we're here today, to talk about the My Green Lab certification program. So this is a proven process that reduces the impact of laboratories. So why My Green Lab certification? Again, it's a tangible, measurable tool to reduce energy usage, water usage, and the waste that you produce. There's a low barrier to entry. It is a powerful engagement tool for the entire laboratory team, as well as the Green Lab lead, as well as facilities. So as we go through some of the more details today, you'll see the engagement that really comes about from this process. And we are aligned with the UN Breakthrough Outcomes campaign as well as part of the Race to Zero. And I'll touch a little bit more on that later on in this presentation. So what is the My Green Lab certification? What does it involve? So it is an online assessment. So you will take it, you'll get a unique link from the programs team. So programs at mygreenlab.org. Reason I put this particular email address, as we go through this process, as you start to submit your EOI, review that information, I think one of the things to maybe talk to your university is to make sure that the programs at Green Lab, mygreenlab.org, is actually permitted to send emails. We do have that email get caught every once in a while. Occasionally it does look like spam because it does say, please follow this link. As we know these days, there are different phishing attempts, but you will receive a unique link in an email from programs at mygreenlab.org. The certification can include up to 14 topics, about 120 questions, depending on the type of equipment you have, as well as the number of topics that you're addressing. The reason I say that, as you look at the topics that are listed on the bottom right of this specific slide, 2 of the topics that are quite often not done in laboratories would be vivaria or animal research and field work. Those are certainly options if you or your team are doing that type of work. But if you don't do that type of work, you simply will click no when you receive the My Green Lab certification assessment, and you won't see any questions on those types of work. Same goes with the equipment. There will be a request at the beginning of the assessment to basically, do you use this specific equipment? Do you use fume hoods? Do you use other types of large equipment? As you go through that will also cater the assessment to the equipment that you use, so you don't have to answer questions about equipment that you don't have in your laboratory. A big part of this, as Dulan mentioned earlier, is to focus on lab behaviors, changing the culture in the lab, and then also specific actions that lab members can take to be greener. I wanted to include a couple of screenshots on the left-hand side. That just gives you an idea of what the assessment itself looks like when you go through the online assessment. Straightforward questions, and then also if there's any points of clarification, there are some illustrations to basically illustrate what that question is asking you if there's any point of confusion. So how does this process work? So as Niall mentioned, EOI submission, once you submit, then you will receive notification about a week or two later, whether your laboratory will be participating in the My Green Lab certification program. Once you receive that approval, the programs team at My Green Lab will reach out to you specifically for the lab information as well as team member information. So as I mentioned before, so we can send that unique link for the assessment to you and the lab team members. So once you receive that unique link, then you start this certification process. Typically a 5-step process, but it is about continuous improvement. So those 5 steps continue as we go through this. So real quick overview of the process. The first thing you're going to do is assess the baseline. So this is going to go to all the lab team members, and it's really going to kind of put a gauge on where you are today. There's no preparation needed. Nothing you need to do internally to prep the team. You don't need to start, a sustainability policy. Hopefully you have one. So hopefully it started already, but you don't need to change it. You don't need to update everyone. You don't need to go through the My Green Lab certification questions beforehand. This is really to gauge where you are as of today, as of, a few weeks from now. So typically we allow 3 weeks for this process. And one of the really important things is we want to see at least 50% participation within the lab team. And we found, as we mentioned a few times, and I'll continue to mention it, we're really focusing on building that culture of sustainability. So in order to build that culture, you really need the team to participate. We found that if you have less than 50% participation, it's difficult to drive those changes that you really want to see as you make these improvements and as you improve sustainability practices moving forward. If you can get 100% participation, that's great. We'd love to see that. But certainly from our perspective, we want to see at least 50% participation from the lab team. At that point in time, we'll analyze the results and we'll provide you with a report and a presentation that gives you your scores, as well as makes recommendations for improvements. Then you move to step 2, where you're implementing those changes. So we don't dictate exactly what you have to do. We will give you a series of recommendations. There will be a lot of recommendations for change. And what we really want to see is you focus on a few of those points. We typically say 3 to 5 topics. As I mentioned, there are up to 14 topics total. So we want you to go ahead and start small, but build that momentum so that as you can get that momentum built, you're going to get more and more participation. And we typically allow 6 to 8 months for that process. And once you're done with those improvements, you feel you're to a good place, you've made substantial changes, you go to step 3, which is to actually get the certification. So this particular assessment is exactly the same set of questions that you did in step 1. Again, we're looking for at least 50% participation. And then based on your score on this particular assessment, that will be your certification level. And at this point in time, we will also make recommendations for improvements. And then over the course of the next couple of years, you'll make more changes. The certification is good for 2 years. So then after 2 years, you'll come back, go through certification. If you haven't hit, a certain level, hopefully within those 2 years, you're able to. And then again, we'll make further recommendations. You'll get certified. And this continuous improvement process, which I think, if you're in laboratories, we're probably all familiar with, is also something that we here at My Green Lab adhere to. So how do we work together as we go through this process? What exactly is My Green Lab's role? And then, from your perspective in the laboratory, what is your role? So here at My Green Lab, what we will do, we will administer the assessment. We'll analyze the results and give feedback, as I mentioned before. We will provide resources for you and the team, and we'll support the change throughout the process. So we do have a fairly extensive resource page that once you're part of the certification itself, you'll have access to. So if there are questions about any of these topics, you'll be able to go into the certification resources, find out some more information, Again, we are always here. If you have specific questions, you can email us. We're happy to support you throughout this entire process. We are not simply here to say, okay, here's your link. Okay, we'll talk to you in 6 months once you're done. We want to make sure we support you through this process, make sure you're able to be successful. But also, it does take work on your side as well. So for the lab lead, this can be a term, put lab lead here. Obviously, depending on your particular laboratory or particular university, there could be different terminology. But typically 1 or 2 people will coordinate the efforts for your specific lab. And then what we typically do is we will provide from My Green Lab those results, those recommendations for improvement to 1 or 2 people that are the leads. And then you'll basically go ahead and facilitate discussions with the rest of the lab team. Again, we will provide a lot of information, and we typically say, don't necessarily share all of that at once. You don't want to overwhelm the lab team, but then you'll also work with the lab team to create action plans for those activities, and you'll support, coordinate with supporting functions as you move forward. The lab members, as I mentioned, filling out the assessment. Quite often we see the lab team members will want to take on certain topics. They want to take action. Quite often we see, as I mentioned, plastics, single-use plastic. Hey, a lot of people in the lab, they're the ones that are seeing that go in the waste bin every single day. They're the ones that really want to make a change, make an impact. Plug load, for example. Hey, we leave equipment on all the time. Do we really need to? Quite often we'll see those lab team members say, hey, I want to take on plug load. I see that we're wasting energy. Can I please help out with this? So I think that is, again, really part of building that culture, getting part of the participation from everybody in the laboratory. And as we know, some of the topics, purchasing, facilities, those are going to come down to other groups that you'll also have to coordinate with. So I think that's an important part of this as well. Certainly the focus is on the lab team members, the daily actions, the work you're doing in the laboratory. But we realize some of these changes you need to reach outside of the laboratory, work with some other teams at the university itself. So after you go through this program, there are several different levels of certification score. It does start at the bronze level, which is 40%, and then it goes up through 80%, which is our highest level, which is the green level of My Green Lab certification. Makes perfect sense. The green is higher than platinum. But here's just an example of a university lab that went through the program. They got slightly over 70%, so they are certified platinum at this point in time. So as we mentioned earlier, we are tied in with the 2030 breakthrough outcomes for the Race to Zero. This is a UN-backed program, and just the specific call to action with the Race to Zero is that 95% of labs across major pharma and med tech companies are My Green Lab certified at the green level by 2030. So certainly this is something we're working on, and it is not just pharma med tech companies that are part of the Race to Zero. If you're not familiar with the Race to Zero, it is a global campaign to rally leadership and support from businesses, cities, regions, and also universities. I wanted to put some numbers up here. I think these numbers are about a month old, so I do apologize as you sit here today or as you're watching this, if these numbers aren't specifically accurate for the day you're watching this. But as of September of 2023, this gives you an idea of the number of companies, universities, cities, et cetera, that have signed up for this program. So certainly what this goal is to reach, net zero for 2050. Part of this is the 2030 breakthrough outcomes. So again, you can start to build that momentum, really start to see these changes. So who's participated in My Green Lab certification? Just a few of the companies, universities that we've worked with up to this point in time. There are numerous others, but I wanted to at least share some of these on the slide. I won't go through and name all of these, but you can see it is a mix of companies as well as universities, as well as some government organizations. So the one great thing about My Green Lab certification, it applies to all different laboratory types. There is not one specific lab type that is going to work for My Green Lab certification. The questions that are included are broad enough to include many different types of labs, whether you're dealing with wet chemistry, whether you're in an engineering lab, whether you're in a clinical lab. This particular certification is going to be applicable for all those types of labs. So as we sit here today, the program itself, A little bit over 2,000 laboratories worldwide have gone through the program. And you'll see, one thing, I think we're building momentum. One of the stats we've seen recently is that laboratories worldwide estimate of about 265,000 laboratories. So I think I look at this number, and certainly as we look in the last 2 years specifically, we've done more laboratories in the last 2 years than since the program was invented and started from October 2015 for October 2021 for those first 6 years. So certainly building momentum, certainly getting in touch with more labs, certainly certifying more labs, but there's a lot of work left to do. I think, as we see the reduction in impact for these labs we've worked with, we realized, the global impact that the program can have as we get more of these 265,000 laboratories involved, which is certainly why we're here today and excited to have this partnership with SFI to get your laboratories into the program and start moving forward. So some of the labs that have participated, have been kind enough to share just some information about, what they've done internally, some of the reductions and cost savings they've seen. So I wanted to share a few of those today. One of these cases is one single laboratory that piloted the lab at Technical University of Berlin. So after going through the program, they found an energy savings of about 35% of the lab's original usage. So this was basically saving 26,000 kilowatt hours per year. Again, this is one single lab that piloted the program. So I think based on their return on investment was about 30x for what they specifically paid for the My Green Lab certification program, but also saved over 14,000 euros. And again, reduce that energy by over 26,000 kilowatt hours per year. So certainly a huge impact. Again, one single laboratory. As we look at that specific lab, I also wanted to share, a university that had gone through with numerous number of labs. So University of Alabama, Birmingham in the United States has one of the largest campus-wide My Green Lab programs in the world. So 78 labs have certified and 79 certifications are currently in progress in 2023. So based on the freezer challenge, which Dulan mentioned earlier, as well as My Green Lab certification, they've reduced energy by about 35,000 kilowatt hours per year per lab. So that is not the total, for the university itself, but each of the labs. That's the average energy reduction that they've seen. They've recycled 20,000 pounds of pipette tip packaging. Again, that's just the packaging, and then also reduced waste by 75,000 pounds. And I should have converted that to kilograms for this audience. I apologize. But yeah, they're seeing, about $44,300 US of energy savings per lab campus-wide. So certainly as you look at, 78, they roughly 160 labs that'll be done with that process soon. Certainly makes a huge impact. So sustainability wise, as well as cost wise. So it is really a win-win situation. So as you go through this program and you look at the overall benefits, what are the benefits? Big picture. Yep, we're going to reduce, save money, save resources. Certainly that's a huge one. As we talked about building a culture of sustainability in the labs, that's really where it all starts. You really want to have buy-in from the team. And then all of that is going to follow from building that culture. You're going to increase the collaboration engagement. And I think one of the great things we see is really innovation as labs go through this process. They want to see, okay, what are other ways we can reduce? What are other ways we can reduce water usage? Hey, you know what? Maybe if we use fin densers instead of single pass cooling. So I think this is going to also really kind of help people think about new processes, think about new methods, ideas. Obviously, we want to have healthy materials for employers and employees, and public recognition of certification. Certainly, we'd love to share information about the laboratories that have gone through this program. And what you can really do is, be the model for other labs in your university. So I think, with going through the details of My Green Lab certification, I wanted to go ahead and turn it back over to Dulan to discuss the Lab Ambassador program a little bit more.
Thank you very much, Scott. So yeah, I just wanted to take a moment to talk to you about our ambassador program. As I mentioned before, the My Green Lab Ambassador program is a free online training course that anyone can go through that gives you a baseline overview of sustainable lab science. In this program, we tackle energy, water, and green chemistry, as well as waste and community. But yeah, you can scan the QR code here with your phones now, or you can head up to the link on your screen to join our global community. Now, when I say global, I really mean it. The My Green Lab Ambassador Program has over 5,000 members in its growing community. And by becoming an ambassador, you'll have access to our global network, many of whom have had the experience with our programs. Therefore, the Ambassador Network can be a great way of staying in contact with other like-minded individuals and participating in the worldwide My Green Lab community. One of the best ways you can take part is by joining our monthly ambassador call, where we invite guest speakers from the community to discuss the sustainability initiatives across the industry. So that's just a map there, yeah, to show that it really are like over 5,000 ambassadors worldwide. So this is our 10-year vision. In the next decade, we envision a complete transformation in the scientific community, such that every individual in science is fluent in sustainability and understands how they can implement that fluency. Every lab is green, and every laboratory product is designed to minimize environmental impact through supply chain. A thriving culture of sustainability in science exists at every leading organization in the science community, and the science community and industry therefore leads the world in sustainability. Speaking of leading the world, Ireland has per capita the most My Green Lab certifications of any country in the world, including the United States of America. So congratulations, you're part of a global movement, and by signing up today, you can join Ireland in leading the world in sustainable lab science. If you're not already subscribed to our newsletter, definitely sign up. We only email once per month, and it's a great way to stay up to date with My Green Lab and sustainability in science. You can also, as I said, become a My Green Lab ambassador, which is the free program that I mentioned, designed as a quick intro to sustainability in the lab. Definitely get your lab My Green Lab certified and get in touch with us if you have any questions. And remember to sign the Million Advocates for Sustainable Science. So I'll finish today by thanking our sponsors. So I'm sure you can see some great familiar faces on the wall if you do work in a lab. But yeah, we really wouldn't be there without them. As a not-for-profit, we really, really appreciate our sponsors. And I'll wrap up with a quote from Margaret Mead, which is, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." I really feel for that, for us at My Green Lab, that resonates really well with our mission and the My Green Lab certification. You know, there's less than 20 of us here at My Green Lab. We're a small group of committed citizens. There are a small group of committed citizens in your lab that are going to take that certification, but we can all make a difference and champion the mission. So thank you for your time, and thank you for helping to build a global culture of sustainability in science.
So one of the first questions we have here pertains to shared labs between multiple PIs, where some are SFI funded and others aren't. And the question is, can the whole lab participate as long as the applicant is an SFI funded PI? So the answer to this, we're very keen to promote a culture of positive behavior change in labs and encourage labs of all types and sizes to participate in the program. So provided that the whole lab is engaged and that an SFI funded investigator puts in the application, then we would be happy to support this application. Another question asks if the program is primarily for individual principal investigators or funded investigators, or if research centers can apply. So what we require for the application process is that it's driven by a PI or an FI, but we are accepting applications from PIs and FIs across our full portfolio of funding programs, which would include research centers. And another question asks if the program is suitable for computer labs. So here I would say yes, that our program is open to all lab types, but I think our colleagues from My Green Lab might be able to give a bit more information on this point.
Yeah, I think certainly, as I mentioned earlier, that a lot of the questions are, broad enough to capture any laboratory type. So I think whether we're talking wet labs or dry labs, certainly applicable. I will say one thing, as I mentioned earlier, there are gatekeeping questions, as we call them, that will basically say, okay, do you have this equipment? And then also specifically mentioned Vivaria and fieldwork. If you don't do those, you will select no, so you don't see those sets of questions. But when it comes to dry labs, there will be some additional questions that aren't hidden that you will have to answer does not apply as you go through the specific assessment. So you will have questions that are applicable to your lab, but there will be some additional ones that won't be applicable. But simply by selecting does not apply, those will not be included in any of the scoring that is calculated. So if you have, 10 people in your laboratory, 5 of them answer a question that's always, and 5 of them say does not apply, the score for that question will be 100%. So certainly don't hesitate in selecting does not apply if it doesn't apply when you go through those specific questions.
And another question here that the Migraine Lab site might be able to answer. And so it's asked, if perceived as necessary or useful, could experts from Migraine Labs team visit our labs for assessment and advice?
So typically we don't have on-site visits. It is something that we have done before, kind of on a selective basis, and really it has something to do with the number of labs that we might be able to visit, or if we're at a conference that's nearby. We've done that frequently, where if we're at a specific conference and a laboratory says, hey, we are near this location, can you come visit us? We're happy to do that. I think right now, the way the program is set up and our focus on sustainability, we do try to limit travel as much as possible, but certainly we do travel. I mean, we go to conferences, and if we can tie in those visits to visit a lab, specifically if it is, a university that has numerous labs that are going through the program, I think then that certainly makes sense. It keeps our impact fairly low instead of just visiting one lab at a time. So, that could be discussed on a case-by-case basis. But as we see, we do get this question because laboratories are familiar with other types of programs where they come on site, look over your shoulder while you do experiments. We have found that most of the questions and most of the advice can be given virtually, whether that's via email, via the certification resources that you'll receive, or if necessary, a conversation or, a webinar, virtual presentation with one of the team members.
Next question then asks if we can have a presentation will be made available afterwards. And yes, this presentation will be made available on the SFI website. And another question then, someone says that they'd like to understand about how changes beyond personal behavior and changes might be funded. So I'd say here, this is a pilot program which we will externally evaluate afterwards. And at the moment, we cannot really commit to additional funding until the pilot has been reviewed. But really what we want to do is use this pilot to kind of build a case for the development of policy in this area, which could down the line lead to a shift in this area. So I think that's all. So as anything comes through imminently, I'd like to thank Scott and Dulan for their input, and thank everyone else for attending.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everyone.